Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video, guys. Today I'm doing a follow-up video on an INTP video that I did a couple of months ago about money problems and communication style. That video was a follow-up to a money problems INTP video. And in that one, I talked about how there are really two things that an INTP, probably more, but two main things that I thought of that an INTP can do to improve their money situation. And that is one, to build competence in something from the ground up so that people um, learn to respect their big picture perspectives that they do not share. Because often people don't they don't listen to the opinion of someone who can't do the job from the ground up, you know? And really what the INTP has to offer is a big picture perspective and foresight. And that is not often valued from the worker bees at the bottom, if that makes sense. And then the second thing was improve communication style. You know, take these complex concepts that we as INTPs really understand and learn how to not water them down, but put them into terms that people who do not think like us, who do not see the world like us, can understand. This seems obvious, but it's not, given that we are talking about personality here, personality systems, Myers-Briggs in particular. And, one of the problems in improving communication is that we have to understand our communication style before we go on improving it. And Myers-Briggs as a system is not really equipped to give us an accurate description about what our communication style is like. Some of us are more dry tempered. Some of us are cooler, hotter headed. Some of us are a little warmer in our communication. And Myers-Briggs really only deals with the cognitive functions at the root level, and that describes our modes of perception and judgment. It doesn't talk about all the nuances of communication and our masculine personality, our feminine personality, etc. So I actually referred us to astrology to get a better picture on that. So this video is really about, actually I'm basing it on a comment that came in on that last video about communication style. How I was basically saying that you have to look to astrology to understand your communication style better, and your communication issues with other people and other types of personalities better. Myers-Briggs is going to do very little in describing that. Astrology is going to do a lot in that. So I'm going to kind of just go through it. I think every part of this comment by Casey James was good. And the first thing I'm going to focus on is that he says, I think many INTPs have a strong Jupiter or Pisces or 12th house element to them. That is definitely true. Jupiter is about abundance and luck, and we can't really separate Jupiter from, if we look at our life trajectory, we can't separate what's going on in Jupiter from our money making potential. It's the area of life where things show up for us, and depending on the sign that Jupiter is in, that's going to tell you the style of personality that you should project if you want things to come to you easily. So, I've always been fairly good with people, but not too fond of people as an INTP. And not all INTPs are like this, but I have found that when I am more warm with people, more accommodating with people, that things show up for me in general, not just through the means of other people's granting me them. It's almost like this weird mystical reality that if I am really warm and open with people, then things just start to flow, even if it's not directly through those people who I'm interacting with. And turns out that my Jupiter is in Cancer. And then pair that with a conjunction between Jupiter and Mercury, you get that deeply philosophical sort of professor type vibe going with that conjunction, that aspect, and that rubs people the right way, generally speaking. Unless they really have some work to do on themselves, I think it's one of the best conjunctions to have. So, of course, with communication, you want to look at Mercury. But as an INTP, you want to look at Jupiter as well, and everything. But Jupiter is that area of your life, that part of your personality that you should project if you want an easy return, and that may include money in the long run. And then Pisces in 12th house energy, we kind of relate these things because Pisces rules the 12th house. 12th house is really the area of mysticism, of the collective unconscious, of the unknown, of everything all at once. And it's the last house of the trajectory of the chart wheel. So it kind of represents death in the last phase of life, and that last phase of this life before journeying into the next one. And so 12th house is really the house of all things all at once. It's very mystical, mysterious, and it deals with existential death and trouble and fear and things like that, especially if it's underdeveloped. So INTPs, and I'm not really talking about the nerdy, video gaming type INTPs, although fantasy can really come into play here, especially with Pisces as well. But an INTP who does have a sort of, open and very spiritual leaning will probably have something going on in the 12th house. And then Casey says, and we also value Saturn a lot. Yes, because INTPs are highly principled, and Saturn is about setting principles for yourself, setting limitations and restrictions on yourself, especially earlier in life. And then for the INTP, and going through the Saturn return, somewhere in a 2.5 year range between 27 and 31. Your Saturn return is going to allow you to loosen up those restrictions that you've placed on yourself to an extent. So we're talking about Saturn and Jupiter here. Interestingly enough, I'm glad that this commenter, this viewer talked about both of these and the 12th house, because I have Saturn in the 12th house opposite Jupiter in the 6th house. So my 12th house is in Capricorn. Saturn is there, very restrictive, very principled, very logical, very daddy energy, but with a spiritual leaning, being in the 12th house. And then Jupiter's in the 6th house, kind of a weak placement for anything. 6th house is kind of a weak house. Anything that shows up there is going to be squashed by another planet that it's, strongly aspected with. So you want to look at your Jupiter and Saturn aspects, if there are any. I have an opposition there. So there was a fundamental, tug of war game being played when it came to what showed up for me for free in abundance, and when it came to luck and that Saturn stuff, how I set limitations and boundaries and restrictions for myself. And I'm very good at that. I'm still very good at that. But I always neglected that Jupiter part of myself, that Cancerian energy that was represented in Jupiter. And so, I'm becoming a little bit less Capricornian, a little bit more balanced with my Cancer placements with age. And I think it's indicative of the INTP to maybe live life in reverse. This is also indicative of my ascendant being in Capricorn. But being very restrictive and mature and intense early in life, and then loosening up those ties as you mature, sort of living life in reverse. And then he also mentions Gemini. Sometimes there's Gemini energy in a chart that will help the INTP. I have my Venus in Gemini, and if you are an INTP, you don't have any Gemini in your chart. Look to see if you have any Sagittarius in your chart. That is the sign that is opposite Gemini. And if you're heavy on Sagittarius and don't have any Gemini, that probably means that you need some Gemini, because opposite signs are shadow personalities of one another, and they're really meant to balance each other out in the perfect way, in the perfect yin and yang sort of way. They're great complements. So if you have some Sagittarius, which is likely, if you don't have Gemini and don't have any 12th house stuff going on too, because Sagittarius is known as being the most, philosophical, devil's advocate type of personality in the zodiac, at least in terms of general energy. Many factors in your chart can influence whether or not this is the case. Geminis can be that way too. Capricorns can be that way. Even Aries can be that way. You want to look at what you lack. So if you have a lot of Sagittarius, I don't have a actual way of mounting this thing up at the moment. So if you have a lot of Sagittarius in your chart and not a lot of Gemini, that means that you need some influence from Gemini everywhere, because we're more than our charts, but what we lack in our chart definitely tells us what we need to complement us. So if you have a lot of Sagittarius in your chart, you may end up with a partner that has some Gemini. And that's just a general rule of thumb to keep in mind as you go about assessing your own birth chart, of course. He says also Taurus energy can help. I find I get along with Taurus in sort of, so I have sort of a peaceful vibe with Taurus. I could probably date one. Home life would be pleasant, I think. We're going to kind of shortcut that for now. And when we're talking about money problems, you also want to bring up second house stuff. What do you have in the second house? Mine is empty, for one. So that's one indicator why I haven't made much money in my life overall, is that, second house is the area of material security, and how your basic resource-based needs are met. And if you don't have anything going on there, that means that you don't value the matters of the second house, because the houses are really a matter of value. And so empty houses are about what we don't really place a lot of emphasis on consciously. But if you do have something going on in the second house, look at that, look into that, because that's going to affect how you make money. Let's see. Mars sometimes tends to be weaker, at least on the masculine end. And he uses the example of Aries. My Mars is actually in Aries. So I probably put off a vibe that's a little more alpha than the average INTP. Especially if you're a lady who I've been with, there's a certain context in which it's undeniable, not to get into too many detail there, as well as our Venus Libra energy can be weak. Yeah, INTPs don't often place a lot of emphasis on relationships. So that may be indicative of a weak Venus, or a weak or empty seventh house, which I have an empty seventh house, which is the house of relationships, romantic, intimacy. That thing that you delve into after the matters of the sixth house, after you figure out what your sort of ideal day-to-day routine and home life should be like, then you can progress into exploring matters of the seventh house, which involves, intimate relationships. I'm empty there. So Libra energy kind of comes along with Venus. Venus is ruled by Libra. I kind of see Libras as weak, and as an INTP, and that's because they tend to be very non-INTP-ish in how they project their thoughts. because Libras are about balance. Like, oh, you're saying that thing, you're saying that thing. Let me kind of find the middle ground, find balance. You know, the scale is the symbol that represents Libra. And to an INTP who really thinks for himself, who values independence of thought, the Libra style of communication can definitely come off as just a cop-out, you know? And I could definitely see how Libras can be walked on. Every sign has potential for that in their own way, but Libras have potential to be walked on by INTPs. We can kind of put it that way. And so if an INTP is going to have any Libra in his or her chart, it's probably not going to be in a very prominent place. It's probably not going to be heavily aspected. Because it just doesn't gel well with the set of values that we typically associate with the INTP, which at the top of that list is independence of thought. Says there's so much more to explore concerning both of these systems. Yeah. I mean, like Myers-Briggs and astrology, they couldn't be more different in many ways. But there are a lot of conclusions, or not so much conclusions, but connections that we can draw between them. And of course, there's very, very limited, if any, solid research done on the connection between these two systems, because neither of these systems are often used in academic research to begin with. And that's a great shame. I mean, there are clear brain functions associated with the cognitive functions in Myers-Briggs. And astrology, I kind of get it. I mean, materialism as a philosophy dominates thinking in scientific research, in academics. And the INTP, who's even remotely philosophically inclined, can see why materialism is not a thorough philosophy, that it's just simply incoherent and collapses in on itself. And astrology, in order to verify, the argument is often made that, well, we can't prove it to be true. Well, that doesn't imply that you can prove it false. Something, in order to have scientific legitimacy, has to have the quality of being falsifiable, even if it's not false. We have to have a mechanism with which to prove it false, even before we can prove it true. Nothing has ever truly, fully, logically been proven true in the sciences, ever, and probably will not be, because the sciences focus on one singular aspect of reality, and that is the empirical realm of reality, which is down here, whereas everything esoteric and spiritual and truth-based at the highest level, closer to God, we could say, is closer to the top of the pyramid. Science just deals with facts at the bottom. And the totality of facts does not equal truth itself. Truth itself, the collective unconscious, God, those are all things that are, they're an energy much greater than the totality of facts in degree, and also different in kind philosophically. But that's another story. So yeah, just wanted to talk about the INTP and a few connections that we might be able to make between the INTP personality type and his or her natal chart in astrology. Look at, we talk about improving communication style. So obviously look at Mercury, but look at Jupiter too, and look at aspects between Mercury and Jupiter. Look at Saturn, that place where we place limitations on ourselves. It may indicate that we've been too hard on ourselves, kind of like maybe I have, having my Saturn in Capricorn, kind of living my life in reverse. And growth is about loosening up those principles and being more accommodating to other people. And then look at aspects between Saturn and Jupiter. And remember, Jupiter is that place where we kind of get things for free. Once we're at ease with whatever style of personality, whatever sign is aligned with Jupiter in our birth chart, and we start to flow with that, then things are going to start to show up for us. Abundance is going to happen. Look at 12th house placements, especially if you're a less computational, less nerdy, and more on the spiritual side, type of INTP. There might be something in the 12th house going on, or maybe there's something severely lacking in the 12th house that you need to be tapping into. Look at Gemini energy, because Gemini is about communication. Many famous rappers and stand-up comedians had heavy Gemini charts. So they have a way with words. INTPs at their best really can be solid communicators. But also Sagittarius is known as the most philosophical type just because he plays devil's advocate all the time. But I actually tend to associate female ENFPs with Sagittarius more often than probably anything else. It's just a trend that I've seen. I don't know. Let me know if you've encountered that. But I found that's very common. Sagittarians, they're not any smarter, any wiser, more right, more wrong than anyone else. That's not what it means by saying that they're more philosophical. It's just that they're able to play devil's advocate, and they kind of have a bit of psychopath energy, especially the men. But let's say you have a heavy, Sagittarius chart and you identify as an INTP. You may be lacking in some Gemini, and finding a partner who has Gemini, or finding some affinity with Gemini. Maybe you have a Sagittarius ascendant, and the right side of your chart is empty. Maybe you need to incorporate that descendant in Gemini somehow. It's all about balance. Look at oppositions. Oppositions are key for finding great balance and therefore great growth in your life, because that natural tug of war game has to find some balance. No one's ever really going to win, because if one wins, the other's stuck face down in the mud. So those are just a few things based on a comment on my last video about INTP and communication style, but I wanted to expand that to incorporate a little more about different things we can look for in an astrological natal chart for the INTP. If you have any other ideas for other videos like this, let me know in the comments. Any thoughts on anything that I've had to say in this one, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.